Pregnant with triplets, she's saved by the groom's rich brother, who hides the baby's true paternit. The reflection in the mirror of the bridal suite at the Grand Harrison Hotel in Nashville didn't lie. Sage Mitchell looked stunning in her French lace dress. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her veil, not only because of the natural anxiety of a bride, but also because of the secret she carried with her. 3 little hearts beating in her womb. "You look perfect," whispered Alexandra, her best friend since culinary school, adjusting the train of her dress. "Mason won't believe it when he sees you." Sage forced a smile, feeling a twinge of guilt. Mason still didn't know about the triplets. She had found out about the pregnancy just 2 weeks before the wedding and had decided to keep the news to herself during the honeymoon. After all, what better gift to start their life together than the news that they were going to be a family? Across the hall, Pierce Whitman was adjusting his brother's tie with the precise fingers of a surgeon. She watched Mason with a mixture of concern and resignation. Since the death of James, his twin brother, 8 months ago, Mason had changed drastically. The impulsive decisions, the hasty marriage to Sage, it all seemed a reflection of unresolved grief. "Are you sure about this, Mason?" Pierce asked, his blue-gray eyes fixed on his brother's. "Getting married is a serious commitment." Mason shrugged, pouring himself another shot of whiskey. "Sage is amazing, you know that. And after losing James, well, life's too short to wait, isn't it?" Pierce held his tongue. Now was not the time to mention how he had observed Sage over the last 2 years, since she had started working in the Whitman family restaurant. How he'd noticed her dedication to transforming the establishment from a simple coffee shop into one of the hottest spots in Nashville. How her smile brightened up any room, even on the most difficult of days. The clock struck 2:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the ceremony, when Sage's world began to fall apart. The first indication was the buzz in the hallway, followed by Alexandra rushing into the suite, her face pale. "Sage," she began, but was interrupted by Pierce bursting through the door, his eyes upset. "Mason's gone," he announced, his voice controlled but tense. "He left this." He held out a crumpled envelope. With trembling fingers, Sage opened the letter. The words danced before his eyes. "I can't do this. I'm sorry. I'm not ready for a family." Mason, the world seemed to spin. Sage staggered, and it was Pierce's strong arms that kept her from falling. The doctor gently guided her to an armchair, his professional instincts taking over. "Take a deep breath," he instructed, kneeling down beside her. "Alexandra, bring some water, please." Tears began to fall, staining her perfect makeup. "He knew," Sage whispered. "Somehow he found out about the babies." Pierce froze. "Babies? I'm pregnant," she confessed, her voice cracking. "With triplets." The silence that followed was deafening. Pierce processed the information, her mental gears working rapidly. The timing would coincide with... "No, it couldn't." "Sage," he began carefully. "How long have you been gone?" "Almost 3 months," she replied, wiping away her tears. "I found out 2 weeks ago." Pierce did the math mentally. 3 months ago, Mason was in Europe. But James was alive, and that farewell party in a restaurant. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. "The babies," he said softly, "are James, aren't they?" The look of shock on Sage's face confirmed his suspicion. "How?" "James told me about you," Pierce revealed. "The night before the accident, he was planning to break up with Rachel, his fiancée, to be with you. But then, the tragedy that took James' life in a car accident had shaken the entire Whitman family. Mason, in particular, plunged into a spiral of impulsive decisions, including proposing to Sage just 2 months later. "No one must know," Sage whispered, instinctively protecting her still flat belly. "It would destroy James' reputation. It would hurt Rachel." Pierce watched the woman before him, strong even at her most vulnerable, protective to the end. He made a decision that would change their lives forever. "Marry me," he proposed, his voice firm. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated. "I can protect you and the babies. Give them a name, a family. No one needs to know the truth." Sage stared at him, confused and emotional. "Pierce, you can't." "I can, and I want to," he interrupted gently. "Not out of obligation, but because she hesitated, deciding that this wasn't the moment to reveal her true feelings. Because it's the right thing to do. Outside the suite, the guests began to murmur, restless at the delay. Alexandra, who had returned with the water, watched the scene with a mixture of concern and hope. "The guests are already here," Pierce continued. "The judge is present. We can turn this day of tragedy into something meaningful, something good." Sage looked at her reflection in the mirror. The wedding dress that was supposed to represent a dream now looked like a cruel reminder of fate. But when her eyes met Pierce's in the reflection, she saw something she had never noticed before. A silent promise of protection, of companionship, perhaps even of something deeper. "Yes," she finally answered, her voice just a whisper. "I'll marry you." The news of Pierce Whitman's sudden marriage to his brother's fiancée spread through the corridors of the Grand Harrison Hotel like fire through dry straw. Alexandra, taking on the role of guardian, kept the more curious guests at bay while the details were hastily rearranged. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice of Theodore Whitman, patriarch of the family, echoed through the main hall. "There's been a slight change in our plans today." His eyes met Pierce's, a mixture of confusion and paternal pride in his countenance. "My son Pierce will be the groom for this celebration." In the bridal suite, Pierce held Sage's trembling hands as she tried to process the magnitude of what they were about to do. The dress, chosen for another man, now seemed a symbol of how life could change in a matter of minutes. "We can still cancel everything," Pierce offered softly, his eyes revealing genuine concern. "It doesn't have to be today." Sage touched his belly instinctively. "And what would be the alternative? Facing all the stares, the questions, the gossip?" She took a deep breath. "Besides, your nephews deserve a name, a family." Pierce felt his heart squeeze as he heard her refer to the babies as her nephews, when in fact they were her stepchildren. The complexity of the situation didn't escape either of them. "We need to establish some rules," he said, taking a seat next to her. "To make this convincing, like a medical contract?" Sage tried to smile, remembering the precision with which Pierce conducted his cases at Nashville Memorial Hospital. "Like an agreement between friends," he corrected gently. "First, we're going to live together in my house in Green Hills. It's spacious enough for a family and close to the hospital." Sage nodded, grateful not to have to return to the apartment full of Mason's memories. "What about the restaurant? You're still the executive chef at Whitman's. Nothing changes professionally." Pierce hesitated before continuing. "Secondly, we need to look like a real couple in public. That means convincing displays of affection," Sage added, blushing slightly. "I see." "And thirdly," Pierce took a deep breath, "when the babies are born, they'll be registered as my children, legally and in every respect." The gravity of this last condition hung in the air between them. It wasn't just an agreement on appearances. It was a permanent change in their lives, a commitment that would affect generations. "Why are you doing this, Pierce?" Sage asked, her green eyes searching his for answers. "Really?" For a moment, Pierce considered revealing his true feelings. How he had admired her quiet strength all these years, how her smile lit up his mornings at the hospital when she delivered the special lunches she prepared for the medical staff, how his heart ached to see her with Mason. "Because family is more than blood," she answered instead, opting for the partial truth. "And because you and those children deserve protection and stability." A soft knock on the door interrupted the moment. Alexandra entered carrying a small box. "I found this in Mason's room," she said, handing it to Pierce. It was a men's wedding ring, the one that should have been worn by her brother. Pierce examined the ring for a moment before sliding it onto his finger. It fit perfectly, as if fate had planned this twist from the start. "It's time," Alexandra announced softly. "The guests are waiting." As they walked to the makeshift altar in the hotel garden, Pierce and Sage shared a look of mutual understanding. It wasn't a fairy tale she had dreamed of, nor the path he had imagined to finding love, but there was something deeply true in their commitment to each other. The judge, already informed of the changes, conducted a brief but meaningful ceremony. When it came time for the vows, Pierce surprised everyone, including himself, by speaking from the heart. "I promise to honor, protect and care for you and our family," he said, emphasizing the last word in a way that made Sage's eyes water. "I promise to be a safe harbor in storms and a light in times of darkness." Sage, touched by the sincerity in his words, replied with equal emotion, "I promise to trust you, to support you, and to build by your side a home full of love and understanding." When the judge declared them man and wife, the kiss they shared was gentle, hesitant, but charged with a silent promise. In the eyes of the guests, it was the beginning of an unexpected love story. For Pierce and Sage, it was the beginning of a much more complex journey, a delicate dance between truth and protection, between duty and desire, between the love that was being born and the secrets they needed to keep. The Nashville sun was beginning to set as they left the hotel, not as the bride and groom everyone had expected to see that afternoon, but as a couple united by extraordinary circumstances and an even more extraordinary commitment to protect three little hearts that beat, unknowingly, at the center of all this history. The move to Pierce's house in Green Hills took place as a meticulously planned operation. Less than a week after the impromptu wedding, Sage found herself in an environment that was both welcoming and completely foreign. An elegant three-story Victorian residence, surrounded by manicured gardens and furnished with a mixture of family antiques and modern pieces. "This is your room," Pierce indicated, carrying Sage's last suitcase to a spacious bedroom on the second floor. "Mine's down the hall. I thought you'd like your own space?" Sage nodded, grateful for the consideration. The king-size bed looked inviting after exhausting days of moving and mornings marked by pregnancy nausea. "Thank you, Pierce, for everything. Have you called a clinic yet?" he asked, his medical manner emerging naturally. "We need to schedule a detailed ultrasound. Pregnancy with triplets requires constant monitoring." "I have an appointment tomorrow with Dr. Lauren Matthews," Sage replied, taking a seat on the edge of the bed. "She specializes in multiple pregnancies." "Lauren?" Pierce arched an eyebrow. "She's my colleague at Nashville Memorial." "Excellent choice." The silence that followed was filled with the weight of everything they weren't saying about James, about the babies, about the future they would have to build on such fragile foundations. The next morning, the reality of their new life began to materialize. Pierce, used to his solitary routine, woke up to find Sage in the gourmet kitchen, preparing an elaborate breakfast. "You needn't have bothered," he said, watching her move gracefully between the stove and the central island. "Cooking calms me down," she explained, placing a plate of eggs Benedict with smoked salmon in front of him. "Besides, I need to keep my mind occupied, so I don't think about the appointment." Pierce tasted the food and had to hold back a groan of approval. Now he understood why Whitman's had become one of Nashville's most popular restaurants under her command. "I'll rearrange my schedule to accompany you," he offered. "If you like, of course." The grateful look Sage gave him made his heart race. It would be great not to be alone. At the clinic, Dr. Matthews welcomed them with a knowing smile. "Pierce, what a pleasant surprise. I didn't know you were Mrs. Whitman's husband." "It was all very recent," he replied diplomatically, holding Sage's hand as she lay on the gurney for the examination. The sound of heartbeats filled the room. 3 distinct rhythms, strong and healthy. Sage couldn't hold back the tears, and Pierce felt his own eyes water. "The babies are in perfect position," Lauren commented, moving the transducer. "All with development compatible with 12 weeks. But we need to discuss some special precautions." The list of recommendations was long. Frequent rest, a specific diet, special vitamins, fortnightly consultations. Pierce wrote everything down in his head, already planning adaptations to his routine to ensure that Sage had all the support she needed. Back at the house, they found Theodore Whitman waiting on the porch. The family patriarch seemed to have aged a decade since the wedding. "We need to talk," he announced without preamble. "About Mason?" Sage paled, but Pierce kept his composure. "Let's go inside, Dad. Would you like some coffee?" In the living room, Theodore got straight to the point. "Mason's in California. He called last night, completely upset. He said something about not being ready to be a father." The look he threw at Sage was penetrating. "You're pregnant, aren't you?" "Yes," Pierce replied before Sage could speak. "We're having triplets, and they're my children, Dad. Mine and Sage's." Theodore studied his son for a long moment. "Is that why you married her? Because of the children?" "I married Sage because I love her," Pierce declared, the words coming out before he could contain them. Beside him, Sage held her breath. The timing may seem strange, but some loves just need the right opportunity to blossom. After Theodore left, partly convinced by his son's performance, Sage confronted Pierce in the kitchen. "You didn't have to lie about loving me," she said softly. "Your father would have understood eventually." Pierce stared at her, aware of the chasm between what he could say and what he should keep silent. "Not all lies are completely false, Sage." Before she could process the meaning of those words, he changed the subject. "I need to get back to the hospital. There's a surgery scheduled for 3 o'clock. Will you be all right on your own?" "I always have been," she replied, but there was a new vulnerability in her voice. That night, lying in her new bed, Sage reflected on how her life had changed so drastically in such a short space of time. From jilted fiancé to Pierce's wife, from single chef to mother-to-be of triplets, from independent woman to someone who, for the first time in a long time, allowed herself to depend on someone else. In the room at the end of the corridor, Pierce was also awake, mentally going over every moment of the day. The way his hand had fit perfectly in Sage's during the ultrasound, the look of trust she had given him during the conversation with her father, the subtle tremor in her voice when she had said that she had always been fine on her own. They both knew they were sailing in dangerous waters, where necessary lies mixed with unspoken truths, where past and present intertwined in unexpected ways, and where the future was as uncertain as the little hearts beating in Sage's womb. The news of Sage's pregnancy spread through Nashville Memorial Hospital like a persistent whisper. Pierce noticed the curious glances of his colleagues as he made his morning rounds, some surprised, others speculative. The story of his sudden marriage to his brother's ex-fiancée, now added to the revelation of the triplets, fueled the gossip in the aseptic corridors. "Triplets are quite a blessing, Dr. Whitman," commented head nurse Margaret, a gray-haired lady who had known Pierce since his residency. Her warm smile carried a hint of concern. Especially considering the timing, Pierce kept his expression neutral, years of medical practice coming in handy at that moment. "Yes, life has its own plans, doesn't it?" At home, Sage was facing his own challenges. Morning sickness had turned into nausea throughout the day, making it difficult for her to work at Whitman's. On this particular morning, she found herself leaning over the sink in the professional kitchen, taking deep breaths while Alexandra held back her hair. "Maybe it's time to take a leave of absence," her friend suggested worriedly. "3 babies are no joke." "I can't," Sage replied, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "The restaurant is my anchor now. I need to keep busy." The sound of familiar footsteps made them both turn around. Theodore Whitman was standing in the kitchen doorway, his stern countenance softened by a fatherly expression. "Sage, dear," he began, approaching cautiously. "I came to check on you." Pierce mentioned that the nausea has been intense. The mention of her husband made Sage's heart leap involuntarily. Pierce had been incredibly attentive over the last few weeks, leaving vitamins ready every morning, texting her during the day to check on her well-being, and even learning how to make ginger tea to help with the nausea. "I'm adapting," she replied, trying to smile. The baby seemed to have inherited the Whitmans' determined spirit. Theodore laughed softly, but his eyes remained serious. "You know, ever since James," he paused, the pain still evident in his voice. "Ever since the accident, I've been watching how our family has changed." Mason closed himself off, left, but Pierce, he blossomed in a way I never imagined possible. Sage felt her stomach turn, and this time it wasn't because of the pregnancy. The mention of James always provoked a storm of emotions. Guilt, longing, regret. "Pierce is an extraordinary man," she managed to say, and the truth in her words surprised her. "Yes, he is," Theodore agreed, studying her carefully. "And you, my dear, have brought light back into his eyes." Before Sage could process the meaning of those words, her phone vibrated with a message from Pierce. "Appointment with Dr. Matthews in 1 hour. I'll pick you up." At the office, Lauren Matthews welcomed them with encouraging news. "The babies are developing perfectly," she announced, moving the transducer over Sage's already visible belly. "Do you want to know the sex?" Pierce and Sage exchanged glances. They hadn't discussed it? Yes, they answered in unison, and the moment of involuntary synchrony made them smile. Well, it looks like we have 2 girls and a boy, Lauren revealed, pointing to the small shapes on the screen. And they're all in ideal positions. On the way home, the silence in the car was charged with emotion. Pierce drove with one hand on the wheel, the other holding tightly to the envelope containing the ultrasound images. 2 girls and a boy, Sage murmured, as if testing the words. They'll need names. We can start thinking about that, Pierce suggested softly. I have a few in mind, if you'd like to hear them. The moment was interrupted by Pierce's cell phone ringing. Mason's name flashed on the screen. The air in the car seemed to freeze. Since his escape on the day of the wedding, Mason hadn't made direct contact with any of them. Pick up, Sage whispered. Even though every fiber of her being screamed the opposite, Pierce connected the call to the car system. Mason, Pierce, his brother's voice sounded distant, altered. I need to know, is the baby mine? Sage felt his world spin. How did he know about the pregnancy? Whit told him? No. Pierce replied firmly, his hand finding Sage's on the center console. The triplets are mine, Mason. Mine and Sage's? Triplets? The surprise in Mason's voice was genuine. I didn't know. I thought. Someone mentioned that she was pregnant, and I assumed. You assumed wrong. Pierce cut him off, his voice now icy. Just like you've assumed a lot of things over the last few months. Sage is my wife now, and those babies are my children. End of story. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Mason muttered something unintelligible and hung up. Pierce parked the car in the garage at home, but neither of them made a move to get out. The tension of the previous moment still hung in the air. Thank you, Sage finally said, her voice breaking. For everything. Pierce turned to face her, his eyes brimming with unspoken emotion. Sage, no, she interrupted him gently. Don't say anything now. Please. He nodded, understanding. There were too many unspoken truths between them. Too many heavy secrets to reveal at this fragile moment. For now, they needed to focus on the 3 little hearts that depended on them. On the family they were building on complex foundations of love, duty, and protection. That night, as the Nashville moon bathed the house in a silvery light, 2 lonely hearts tried to find peace in their choices, while 3 new hearts beat in perfect harmony, oblivious to the dramas that surrounded them. Dr. Sarah Bennett's psychiatric office in Belle Meade offered a panoramic view of the Nashville skyline. Sage watched the city through the large window, her hands resting instinctively on the belly that was beginning to show more obvious signs of her 4-month pregnancy. How are you coping with all these changes, Sage? Dr. Bennett's soft voice brought her attention back to the present. It's complicated, Sage admitted, adjusting herself in the leather armchair. Pierce had insisted on therapy sessions, worried about the emotional impact of everything that was happening. Sometimes I wake up, and for a moment I forget that James is gone, that Mason ran away, that I'm now married to Pierce. And how is your relationship with Pierce? The question made Sage pause. How could she describe something that she herself didn't fully understand? The mornings shared in the kitchen, his constant care, the moments of comfortable silence, the glances that lasted a second longer than they should have. Pierce is amazing, she finally replied. He's turned a protection agreement into something that feels almost real. That same afternoon, at Nashville Memorial, Pierce was facing his own demons during a particularly delicate surgery. His hands moved with precision over the patient, but his mind wandered to the last night when he found Sage asleep on the living room sofa, a book of baby names slumped in her lap. Dr. Whitman called Dr. Marcus Chun his assistant in surgery. Is everything all right? Perfectly, Pierce replied, forcing himself to focus. He couldn't allow his emotions to interfere with his work. After the surgery, Pierce found a message from Alexander on his cell phone. Sage was sick at the restaurant. He's resting at home now. The initial panic was replaced by determination. Within 15 minutes, he was home, climbing the stairs every 2 steps. He found Sage in her room, pale but conscious. It was just a dizzy spell. She tried to play it down, but Pierce was already in medical mode, checking her blood pressure, "We need to reduce your workload at the restaurant," he declared, taking a seat on the edge of the bed. "3 babies mean triple demands on your body." "I can't leave Whitman's," Sage protested. "It's James' legacy." The name hung between them like a restless ghost. Pierce held his hand, a gesture that had become natural in recent weeks. "James would have wanted you to take care of yourself," he said softly. "Take care of the babies." Silent tears began to roll down Sage's face. "Sometimes I wonder what he would think of all this. Of us?" Pierce felt his heart squeeze. "James always wanted you to be happy, Sage. He told me so. When? The night before the accident," Pierce revealed, his voice choked by the memory. "He said he'd found someone special, someone who made his heart sing. He didn't mention his name, but his eyes. I've never seen him so alive." Sage sobbed, and Pierce pulled her into his arms without thinking. It was like this now, moment of intimacy born of shared pain and mutual comfort. "You know what else he told me?" Pierce continued, his voice just a whisper. "That he wanted me to find something like that too. Someone who made me feel complete." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken meanings. Sage pulled away slightly, her eyes meeting his. "Pierce," a sudden kick interrupted the moment. Sage gasped, bringing his hand to his stomach. Pierce reacted instantly, his professional hands joining hers. "That was the first kick," Sage whispered, amazed. Another movement, this time stronger. Pierce laughed, a sound of pure joy that transformed his usually serious face. "Looks like we got a soccer player here," he joked, and the previous moment of tension dissolved into something lighter, more hopeful. That evening, during the dinner they shared in the spacious kitchen, Pierce made a proposal. "I've hired a sous chef for Whitman's," he announced. "Rebecca Martinez. She worked at Le Bernardin in New York. She could take on some of your responsibilities." Sage opened his mouth to protest, but Pierce continued. "You'll still be the executive chef. You'll still make all the important decisions. But you'll have qualified help. You've thought of everything, haven't you?" Sage asked, a reluctant smile appearing on his lips. "I try," he replied simply, and there was so much between the lines in that single word. Later, alone in her room, Sage leafed through the photo album Alexandra had rescued from her old apartment. Photos of Whitman's, of the team, of happy times. Her fingers stopped on one particular photo. Her and James, laughing during the opening of the new menu. Pierce was in the background, watching the scene with an expression she had never noticed before. "Oh," she whispered to herself, understanding beginning to blossom. Downstairs, Pierce was working on his laptop, reviewing medical records, but his mind kept going back to the moment in Sage's room, to the weight of her in his arms, to the feel of the babies kicking against his hands. Family. He was building a family, even if it was on a foundation of secrets and half-truths. The Nashville moon bathed the house in soft shadows, while 2 lonely hearts danced a hesitant waltz of unspoken discoveries and revelations, protected by the silence of the night and the growing love that neither of them was ready to admit. Rebecca Martinez's arrival at Whitman's brought a new dynamic to the restaurant's routine. The Puerto Rican sous chef, with her experience at Le Bernardin, quickly won the respect of the staff. Sage watched from his office door as Rebecca ran the kitchen with a perfect blend of authority and charisma. "She's exactly what we needed," Alexander commented, handing Sage a ginger tea. "Now you can really rest." But the enforced rest made Sage uneasy. At 4.5 months pregnant, her belly was already attracting attention, and the triplets seemed particularly active in the mornings. Pierce had set up a comfortable sofa in his office at the restaurant, insisting that she take regular breaks. "Sage," Theodore Whitman's voice surprised her. The family patriarch rarely visited the restaurant's administrative area. "Can I steal a moment of your time?" She nodded, indicating the chair in front of her. Theodore looked older, more tired, carrying the weight of family secrets on his shoulders. "I found this while organizing the home office," he said, placing a wooden box on the table. It belonged to James. The air seemed to leave Sage's lungs. With trembling hands, she opened the box, revealing a collection of letters and a small leather notebook. "He wrote about you," Theodore continued softly. "He didn't mention your name, but now I understand that it was you." Silent tears began to roll down Sage's face as she read extracts from the diary. James' elegant handwriting described secret meetings in the kitchen after work, conversations about dreams and recipes, a love that grew in the shadows. He was planning to leave Rachel, Theodore revealed. On the night of the accident, he was on his way to meet her to break off the engagement. The ever-present guilt threatened to engulf Sage. "I didn't know." He never said. "I'm not here to judge, darling," Theodore interrupted her gently. "I'm here because I finally understand why Pierce did what he did. He knew all along, didn't he?" Before Sage could answer, a strong dizziness hit her. Theodore reacted quickly, calling for help. Within minutes, Pierce was there, his hospital coat still on, his expression worried. "Low blood pressure," he diagnosed after a quick examination. "Let's go home. Dad, can you take care of things around here?" In the car, the silence was heavy. Pierce drove with one hand on the wheel, the other holding Sage's tightly. "Your father knows," she finally said. "About James and me." Pierce nodded slowly. "Maybe it's for the best. Fewer secrets to carry around." At home, while Pierce prepared a nutritious snack in the kitchen, Sage allowed herself to read more of James' diary. One entry in particular caught her eye. "Pierce asked me about her today. He didn't say her name, but he knows. I can see it in his eyes when she's around. My brother has always been the most observant of the three of us. Sometimes I wonder if it shouldn't have been him from the start." "Pomegranate juice with coconut water," Pierce announced, entering the room. "Great for the pressure and rich in." He stopped when he saw the diary in her hands. "Ah, you knew," Sage said softly. "About James and me. From the beginning?" Pierce sat down next to her on the sofa, handing her the glass. "Yes. James never had to tell me. I saw how you looked at each other, how you smiled when you were together. Why didn't you ever say anything?" "What was there to say?" Pierce shrugged, but there was tension in his shoulders. "James was my brother. He deserved to be happy. You deserved to be happy. In you." Sage dared to ask, "What did you deserve?" The moment was interrupted by a loud kick from the babies. Pierce automatically put his hand on Sage's belly, smiling when he felt another movement. "I think someone's hungry," he joked, changing the subject. "How about that eggplant lasagna you love?" While Pierce cooked, Sage watched him from the kitchen island. There was a gracefulness to his movements, a precision that reflected his medical nature even in the simplest tasks. "Lauren called today," he commented as he chopped the vegetables. "She wants to do a 4D ultrasound at her next appointment. We can see the babies' faces." "That would be wonderful," Sage smiled, unconsciously stroking his belly. "Have you thought about names?" Pierce stopped what he was doing, turning to face her. "Actually, yes. I was thinking of Emma for one of the girls. It was our grandmother's name." "Emma," Sage repeated, testing the sound. "It's perfect." The moment was interrupted by Pierce's phone. An emergency at the hospital required his presence. "I'll be back as soon as I can," he promised, kissing her forehead in a gesture that had become natural. Rest. Alone, Sage returned to James' diary, trying to better understand the past that was now shaping her future. His words seemed to echo through time, loaded with meanings that she was only now beginning to understand. Night fell over Nashville, and with it came a clarity that Sage hadn't expected. In the midst of secrets revealed and truths still hidden, something new was blossoming. Something as unexpected as it was welcome, as frightening as it was inevitable. When Pierce returned hours later, he found Sage asleep on the sofa, James' diary open on her lap, one hand protectively on her belly. He carefully covered her with a blanket, allowing himself a moment to observe the peace on her face. "Good night, my family," he whispered, including in that one word all the love he hadn't yet dared to express out loud. The meeting room at Nashville Memorial Hospital was packed when Pierce presented the complex case of pediatric heart surgery. His colleagues listened intently as he explained the innovative procedure he planned to perform, but their thoughts kept returning to home, where Sage was resting after yet another episode of low blood pressure. "Impressive, Dr. Whitman," commented Dr. Harold Reynolds, head of the surgery department. "But are you sure you can commit to such delicate surgery at this time? I hear your wife is having a complicated pregnancy." Pierce adjusted his tie, a nervous habit he had developed over the years. "I can assure you of my total dedication to the case, Dr. Reynolds." Sage has all the support she needs. After the meeting, while walking down the corridor towards his office, Pierce was intercepted by Lauren Matthews. "How is she?" Lauren asked without preamble. "Rebecca called to tell me about the fainting spell in the restaurant." "Stabilized," Pierce replied, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of concern. "But the triplets are making a lot of demands on her. The last scan showed that the boy is smaller than the girls." Lauren nodded in understanding. "It's common with multiple pregnancies. We'll increase the monitoring." "And how are you coping with all this?" The question caught Pierce off guard. Since the impromptu wedding, everyone had been asking about Sage, about the babies, but few had been concerned about his own emotional state. He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Learning every day." At home, Sage was leafing through decorating magazines, planning the baby's room. The room that used to be Pierce's office was being transformed into a nursery, the walls freshly painted in a soft shade of aqua green. "3 cribs," she muttered to herself, stroking her belly. "How are we going to manage?" "With a lot of help," replied Alexandra, who had just arrived with bags of shopping. "And speaking of help, look what I found." She took 3 small jumpsuits out of the bags. 2 pink and 1 blue, all with little butterflies embroidered on them. "Alex," Sage felt tears for me. "Fucking hormones. They're perfect." "Pierce gave me carte blanche to start the trousseau," Alexander revealed, smiling. "He's really committed to making everything work, isn't he?" Sage thought about how Pierce had reorganized his entire life to accommodate her and the babies. How he checked her blood pressure every morning before going to the hospital. How he always left messages asking if she had fed. How his big, sure hands naturally found their way to her belly when the babies moved. "He's amazing," she admitted softly. "Sometimes I wonder if I deserve all this." "What you deserve," Alexander said firmly, "is to be happy. And anyone with eyes can see how you two are getting more and more." The sound of the front door interrupted the conversation. Pierce entered, carrying several bags from a market. "I brought you that pistachio ice cream you've been craving," he announced, stopping when he saw Alexandra. "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you were visiting. I was just leaving." Alexander smiled, winking discreetly at Sage. "I'll leave you two to the ice cream." In the kitchen, while Pierce organized the shopping, Sage watched him with renewed attention. There was something different about him today. A tension in his shoulders, worry in his eyes. "Did something happen at the hospital?" she asked softly. Pierce paused, a can of peaches and syrup still in his hand. "I have an important surgery next week. A 5-year-old girl with a complex heart condition. And you're worried?" "It's a risky procedure," he admitted, finally turning to face her. "And with everything that's going on here..." "Hey," Sage approached, touching his arm gently. "You're a brilliant surgeon. That girl needs you." Pierce covered her hand with his. And for a moment they stayed like that, connected by something deeper than words. "I found more letters," Sage said after a moment. "In James' diary?" Pierce tensed slightly, but didn't pull away. He wrote about you. About how you were always the pillar of the family, even when no one noticed." She paused, gathering her courage. "About how you watched me when you thought no one was watching." The air between them became charged with undeclared electricity. Pierce slowly released her hand, turning to put the rest of the shopping away. "James was always very observant," he commented, his voice controlled. "Pierce," Sage called out softly, "can we keep pretending this is just a deal?" He froze, a box of cereal hanging in the air. "Sage, because it's not anymore, is it?" she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Not for me." Pierce placed the box on the counter with studied care, as if he were undergoing one of his delicate surgeries. When he turned, his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "No," he finally admitted. "It was never just a deal. Not for me." One of the babies chose that moment to kick particularly hard. Sage gasped, bringing her hand to her belly, and Pierce was at her side in an instant. "Here," she took her hand, guiding it to the exact spot. "I think it's the boy. He's always been the most agitated." "How do you know?" "Mother's intuition," she smiled, and then, more gently, "I was thinking of calling him James." Pierce held his breath, his eyes watery. It would be perfect." That night, lying in her bed, Sage reflected on how life could change in such unexpected ways. How a marriage of convenience could turn into something so real, so profound. How the heart could heal and learn to love again in a completely different way. In the next room, Pierce was also awake, planning next week's surgery, but his thoughts kept returning to the conversation in the kitchen, to the silent admission of long-held feelings, to the possibility of a future that, for the first time, seemed more than just a protection agreement. The fetal monitor registered 3 distinct heartbeats as Dr. Lauren Matthews performed the 4D ultrasound. Sage and Pierce watched mesmerized as tiny faces took shape on a high-definition screen. "There's Emma." Lauren pointed to one of the girls, who seemed to be sucking her thumb. "In here? Oh, looks like we've got another little performer." "She's waving," Sage whispered excitedly, squeezing Pierce's hand. "And our little James," Lauren continued, adjusting the transducer for a better view. "Still smaller than his sisters, but developing well." Pierce studied the screen with clinical eyes, years of medical experience mixing with paternal emotion. "The size difference still worries me. It's common in triplets," Lauren assured him, "but we'll increase monitoring to make sure. And Sage needs to increase her calorie intake." After the appointment, as they walked through the hospital parking lot, Pierce noticed Sage shivering slightly in the cold October air. Here, he took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "We can't risk a cold." Always the protective doctor, she smiled, but her eyes revealed a deeper emotion. "Pierce, about the other girl. I was thinking of calling her Grace." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Grace? It means grace, mercy," Sage explained softly. "It seems appropriate, all things considered." "Emma, Grace, and James." Pierce tested the names, a soft smile forming on his lips. "It's perfect." At Whitman's, Rebecca had turned the kitchen into a laboratory for developing new dishes. Sage watched from the doorway as the sous chef experimented with a fusion of Latin American and Southern flavors. "We need to modernize the menu for the winter," Rebecca explained, offering Sage a spoonful of sauce to taste, "but keeping the essence of the restaurant." "Interesting," Sage commented, savoring the complexity of the flavors. "Add a touch of aged bourbon. It will complement it perfectly." Theodore Whitman chose that moment to appear, carrying an old box of photographs. "Sage, darling, I found something you should see." In the photos, yellowed by time, moments from the Whitman's history were unfolding. Pierce and James as children, identical except for their smiles. James more open, Pierce more restrained. Mason was always a step behind his brothers. This one, Theodore pointed to a particular photo, was taken the day Pierce decided to become a doctor. James had fallen from the tree in the backyard, and Pierce, only 10 years old, kept calm and looked after his brother until the ambulance arrived. Sage studied the picture, noticing the determined expression on Pierce's young face, so similar to the one he still wore during his surgeries. "He was always the protector," Theodore continued, "even when no one asked for protection." At night, at home, Pierce found Sage asleep on the sofa in the living room, the old photos scattered over her growing lap. Carefully, he began to collect them, stopping when he recognized one in particular, himself, at the age of 16, receiving a science award. In the background, almost unnoticed, was a young waitress serving water. His mother? "She works so hard," Sage commented sleepily, having woken up without him noticing. "Just like me when I started at the restaurant." Pierce sat down next to her, the photo still in his hands. "That's why I've always admired your dedication. It reminded me of her." "Pierce," Sage straightened up, turning to face him fully. "We need to talk about us." The air seemed to thicken, filled with unspoken words and long-suppressed feelings. "About what happened in the kitchen the other day," she continued. "About what we admitted," Sage, he interrupted gently. "We don't need to define that right now. You're going through a lot with the pregnancy, with the memories of James." "That's exactly why we need to be honest," she insisted. "These babies deserve to be born in a home where there are no doubts, where love isn't just a convenient word." Pierce felt his heart racing. "And what do you want?" "I want us to stop pretending that this is just an agreement," she replied, her voice steady despite the tears that were starting to pour. "I want us to admit that what's growing between us is as real as the 3 hearts I carry." One of the babies kicked, as if in agreement, and they both laughed softly. Pierce moved his hand to Sage's belly, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "It's always been you," he finally admitted, his voice low but clear. "Even when it was wrong, even when it should have been impossible, it was always you." The kiss that followed was unlike any other they had shared. It was no longer a performance for the public, no longer part of an agreement. It was real, deep, true. When they broke apart, Sage rested her forehead against his. "I think we need to redecorate the master bedroom," she whispered. Pierce laughed, the sound full of joy and promise. "I think we need to redecorate a lot more than that." Outside, Nashville prepared for another night of music and dreams. While inside that Victorian house in Green Hills, two souls finally found their way to each other, protected by growing love and three little hearts that beat in perfect harmony. The operating table at Nashville Memorial was a familiar altar for Pierce, but on that particular morning, his hands trembled slightly as he prepared for the delicate heart surgery on 5-year-old Lily Anderson. The image of the triplets' last ultrasound still fresh in his mind, mixed with the responsibility of the procedure in front of him. "Pressure stable, Dr. Whitman," informed head nurse Margaret, her calm voice anchoring Pierce in the present. "We can start when you're ready." The next 6 hours were a precise dance of scalpels and sutures, each movement calculated with a precision that had made Pierce one of Tennessee's most respected cardiac surgeons. When he finally closed Lily's tiny chest, the relief was palpable in the operating room. "Flawless surgery," commented Dr. Reynolds, who had observed the entire procedure. "Your triplets will have an extraordinary father." The mention of the babies brought an involuntary smile to Pierce's lips, even under the surgical mask. At home, Sage was waiting for him with news of the nursery decorations and the idea of returning to her. Now his wife, in every sense, warmed his heart in a way he had never imagined possible. At Whitman's, Rebecca and Sage were working on revamping the winter menu. The sous chef had become not only a valuable collaborator, but also an unexpected confidant. "So," Rebecca commented as she adjusted the seasoning of a bourbon sauce, "you've finally admitted it?" Sage blushed, stroking her prominent belly. "It was inevitable, I guess. Pierce is, unlike anyone I've ever met." "Differ from James?" Rebecca asked softly, no judgment in her voice. "Completely," Sage replied after a moment's thought. "With James it was intense, passionate. But with Pierce, it's like finding a safe haven you didn't even know you were looking for." The sound of familiar footsteps interrupted the conversation. Theodore Whitman entered the kitchen, carrying an old carved wooden box. "I found this in the attic," he announced, placing the box on the counter. "It was my Elizabeth's. I thought you might want it for the babies." Inside the box were 3 small handmade blankets, perfectly preserved over the years, each with a delicate Whitman monogram embroidered in the corner. "They're beautiful," Sage whispered, touching the soft fabric with reverence. "Elizabeth made one for each of the boys," Theodore explained, his voice laced with emotion. "Pierce always slept wrapped in his. Even when he was grown up, she said it kept him safe during storms." The image of little Pierce seeking comfort in his mother's blanket made Sage's heart squeeze. How many storms had he faced alone? How many times had he been a safe haven for others without having his own? At night, when Pierce finally arrived home, he found Sage asleep in the armchair of the newly decorated nursery, the vintage blankets folded carefully on his lap. The walls, once empty, now displayed a delicate mural of butterflies and stars, painted in soft shades of green and gold. "Hey," she murmured, waking up to his gentle touch. "How was the surgery?" "A success," he replied, kneeling down beside her. "Lily will make a full recovery." "I never doubted it," Sage smiled, guiding his hand to her belly where the babies were actively moving. They didn't doubt it either. They were restless all day, as if they knew their father was doing something important. Pierce laughed softly, but his eyes were serious when they met hers. "I found this in my office today," he said, pulling an envelope out of his coat pocket. "It's a letter from James. He wrote it the night before the accident." Sage held her breath, her hands instinctively protective over her belly. What does it say?" "He knew," Pierce revealed softly, "about my feelings for you. He wrote that he hoped that one day I would find the courage to be happy, even if it meant waiting for the right moment. Silent tears began to roll down Sage's face. He was always the most perceptive of us all. "Sage," Pierce began, his voice trembling slightly, "I know we started this as an agreement, as a way to protect you and the babies. But I want you to know that every moment, every little gesture, every smile, it's all become real to me in a way I never imagined possible." "For me too," she whispered, leaning her forehead against his. "So real that sometimes it scares me." "It shouldn't," he smiled, gently wiping away her tears. "Because I promise to be here, in every moment, in every storm, in every joy, not just for the babies, but for us." The kiss they shared was gentle, full of silent promises and hopes for the future. A future that, although built on complex foundations of loss and redemption, now shone with infinite possibilities. The first snow of the Nashville winter began to fall as Sage completed her 6th month of pregnancy. Whitman's was decorated for the festive season, with little golden lights and holly arrangements scattered around the room. Rebecca had created a special Christmas menu that blended Southern traditions with contemporary touches. Guests at the Grand Harrison have made over 50 reservations for Christmas dinner, Alexander reported, consulting her tablet. "Looks like your latest article in Nashville Life magazine about comfort food really made an impact." Sage smiled, adjusting the special apron Pierce had ordered to accommodate her growing belly. The delicately embroidered word "chef of 4" made everyone smile. "Actually," she began, but was interrupted by a sudden dizziness. Rebecca reacted quickly, guiding her to a nearby chair. "That's enough for today," the sous chef declared firmly. "I could take care of the rest. Pierce made me promise not to let you overdo it." At Nashville Memorial, Pierce was concentrating on a meeting with the pediatric cardiac surgery team when his phone vibrated. Rebecca's message made his heart leap. Sage had another dizzy spell. "He's fine, but he needs to rest." "Dr. Reynolds," he interrupted the presentation. "Can I ask for a moment?" Minutes later, he was driving through the snow towards the restaurant, his mind divided between worry and planning. Christmas would be in 2 weeks, and he had a special surprise prepared for Sage, something he had been secretly organizing for months. At the restaurant, he found Sage sitting in her office, surrounded by baby furniture catalogs. "It was nothing serious," she said before he could ask. "Just normal tiredness." Pierce knelt down beside her, his hands automatically finding the spots where babies used to move the most. "Lauren said we need to monitor your pressure more closely. Triplets in the 3rd trimester, or no joke." "I know," Sage sighed, resting her head on his shoulder. "But I can't stop thinking about Christmas. It's the first time the restaurant will be doing such an elaborate dinner, and with so many reservations." "Rebecca can take care of that," Pierce said softly. "Besides, I have other plans for us at Christmas." Sage raised her head, curious. "What kind of plans?" "It's a surprise," he smiled, kissing her forehead. "But first, let's go home. You need to rest." At home, while Sage slept on the sofa in the living room, Pierce worked quietly in the nursery, assembling the last of the 3 cribs. Every detail of the room had been carefully planned. Elizabeth's vintage blankets, the butterfly mural, the strategically placed nursing chairs. Theodore showed up in the late afternoon, bringing more boxes from the attic. "I found the musical mobiles Elizabeth made for the boys," he said, his voice soft so as not to wake Sage. "And some old photos I thought you might like to see." Pierce paused his work, picking up one of the photographs. In it, his mother held James and him, newborn babies, while Mason, age 2, looked on curiously. "She would have loved Sage," Theodore commented, taking a seat in one of the armchairs. "And she would have been proud of the man you've become." "Sometimes I wonder," Pierce began, hesitantly, "if I'm doing the right thing. If I can be a good father to them, considering how it all started." "Son," Theodore interrupted gently, "true love doesn't always begin the way we expect it to. Sometimes it grows in the most unlikely places, in the most difficult circumstances. What matters is how we choose to nurture it." A movement at the door caught their attention. Sage was standing there, watching the scene with watery eyes. "Sorry," she said, entering the room. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're never interrupting," Pierce smiled, holding out his hand to her. "Come and see what Dad's brought." As Theodore showed her the family treasures, Sage noticed how Pierce held each mobile, each photograph with reverence. It was as if each object was a bridge between past and future, between the memories of her own childhood and the promises of tomorrow with her children. "Pierce," she called softly when Theodore said goodbye, "about Christmas. Trust me." He smiled, that special smile he reserved just for her. "I have everything planned." The following week, as the snow continued to fall on Nashville, Pierce finalized the last details of his Christmas surprise. Lauren had helped with part of the plan, ensuring that it would be safe for Sage to participate. "Just promise you'll film her reaction," the doctor asked during a routine consultation. "It's not every day that someone gets a present like that." At Whitman's, Rebecca and Alexandra worked in tandem to keep everything running smoothly, allowing Sage to reduce her workload as Pierce had insisted. "You know," Rebecca commented as she finished the supper menu, "when I came to work here, I didn't expect to find a family." Sage smiled, understanding the sentiment perfectly. She hadn't expected to find such a complete home either, such deep love, a life so different from what she had planned. At night, lying in the bed she now shared with Pierce, Sage watched the snow fall through the window. Her husband slept peacefully beside her, one hand resting protectively on her belly, even in her sleep. "You have the best father in the world," she whispered to her babies, feeling the tiny movements she already recognized so well. Emma, always active at night, Grace, responding to gentle touches, and James, her little warrior, growing strong despite being the smallest. Pierce murmured something in his sleep, pulling her closer. Sage smiled, thinking of how fate had curious ways of setting things right. How sometimes you had to lose one dream to find another, bigger and truer. The snow continued to fall outside, covering Nashville with a white blanket of possibilities, while inside that house in Green Hills, a family built on courageous choices and true love rested in peace, awaiting the surprises that Christmas promised to bring. Dr. Lauren Matthews' office was decorated with discreet Christmas decorations when Sage arrived for her weekly checkup. At 6.5 months pregnant, each appointment brought a mixture of anxiety and anticipation, especially with James still less developed than his sisters. "The beats are strong," Lauren commented, moving the transducer with precision. "And look at this. It seems that our little warrior has grown significantly in the last week." Pierce, who had rearranged his surgical schedule to be present, shook Sage's hand gently. His professional gaze studied the numbers on the monitor, but his fatherly heart raced with every movement captured on the screen. "We can try to get to 34 weeks, Lauren continued, making notes on her tablet. "But we need you to go on bed rest after Christmas, Sage." "But the restaurant," Sage began to protest. "Rebecca is more than ready," Pierce interrupted her gently. "And I've got a surprise that will make all that rest worthwhile." Lauren smiled, complicit in the secret Pierce had been planning for months. "Trust your husband, Sage. He knows what he's doing." Back in the car, as Pierce drove through the snowy streets of Nashville, Sage noticed a different glint in his eyes. "You're up to something?" "Maybe," he smiled, that smile that still made her heart leap. "But first, we have an important lunch." The car pulled up in front of the Belle Meade Plantation, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. At the entrance, Theodore Whitman was waiting for them, accompanied by an elegant woman Sage had never seen before. "Rachel?" Pierce whispered, and Sage felt his blood run cold. "Hush it, Addison, Jim fiancé." "Don't worry," Pierce continued, sensing his tension. "She asked for this meeting. She said she needed to tell us something important." Lunch was served in a private room overlooking the snow-covered gardens. Rachel, who had moved to Boston after James' death, maintained a serene demeanor that surprised Sage. "I found these letters," Rachel began, pulling an envelope out of her handbag. "James wrote them for me, but never sent them. In the last one, he explains about the two of you, Sage, about the love you shared." Sage felt tears forming, but it was Pierce's firm hand on her waist that kept her centered. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," Rachel continued. "I came because I finally understood that James was right. The heart chooses its own paths, and sometimes true love isn't the one we planned." Her eyes moved between Pierce and Sage, an understanding smile on her lips. "As you two proved so well." Theodore, who had remained silent, snorted with emotion. Family isn't just blood, he declared. It's choice, it's love, it's protection. The lunch continued with an unexpected lightness. Stories about James being shared with laughter and tears. Rachel talked about her new job in Boston, about the therapist who helped her process her grief, about how seeing Pierce and Sage together brought a sense of completeness to the cycle. When they said goodbye, Rachel hugged Sage affectionately. "Take good care of them," she whispered. "The babies and Pierce. You deserve all the happiness in the world." On the way home, Pierce drove in silence, processing the emotions of the encounter. Sage watched the snowflakes dancing in the air, thinking about how life had curious ways of tying up loose ends. "Pierce," she called softly, "did you know she was coming?" "Rachel called me 2 weeks ago," he admitted. "She said she needed closure, that finding the letters had changed everything. But mostly," he paused, parking the car in front of the house, "she wanted to give us her blessing." "Why?" Pierce turned off the engine, turning to face her fully. "Because she, like James, could see what was growing between us long before we admitted it ourselves." That evening, as the snow continued to fall softly outside, Pierce and Sage were sitting in the nursery, organizing the last pieces of the layette. Elizabeth's musical mobiles tinkled softly, creating a melody that seemed to lull not only the babies still in the womb, but also the hearts of the parents-to-be. "You know," Sage commented, folding a small pair of overalls, "I think I finally understand what everyone said about time healing all wounds." "It's not really healing," Pierce replied thoughtfully. "It's more like transformation. Pain turns into memory, memory into learning, and learning into love," she added, meeting his eyes. Pierce smiled, that smile that was hers alone, and pulled her closer. "In 2 days it's Christmas," he whispered against her hair. "And I have something special planned for us. Are you going to tell me what it is?" "Patience," he laughed softly. "Some surprises are worth the wait." Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in almost palpable anticipation. Pierce had spent the last few days in whispered conversations on the phone, exchanging complicit glances with Lauren and Theodore, feeding Sage's curiosity about his mysterious Christmas surprise. "You need to get ready," he announced, entering the room where Sage was resting. "We have a special appointment tonight." "Pierce, I thought we'd be spending Christmas at home," she protested softly, stroking her prominent belly. "The babies have been especially fussy today." "Trust me," he smiled, that smile that still made her heart melt. "I promise it will be worth it." An hour later, Sage was in the car, dressed in an elegant green velvet maternity dress, an early gift from Alexandra. Pierce drove through the bright streets of Nashville, occasionally casting affectionate glances in her direction. "I closed my eyes at the last turn like you asked," Sage laughed softly. "But I can feel that we're going up." "Almost there," Pierce replied, his voice betraying restrained emotion. When the car finally stopped and Pierce helped her out, Sage felt the cool night air and the distant sound of Christmas music. "Can I open my eyes?" "Now?" Sage blinked, adjusting her vision to the soft light. They were at the top of Love Circle, Nashville's highest point, with a panoramic view of the city lit up for Christmas. But that wasn't all. A small gazebo had been built there, decorated with thousands of tiny lights and winter flowers. "Pierce," she whispered, thrilled. "Wait," he smiled, leading her into the gazebo. There, an elegantly set table awaited them, along with Rebecca, who was smiling proudly beside a serving trolley. "Special menu for the occasion," the sous chef announced, beginning to serve the dishes that Sage recognized as her own favorite recipes, each with a special Pierce touch. "You learned to cook all this?" Sage asked, incredulous. "Rebecca is an excellent teacher," Pierce admitted. "I've spent the last few weeks practicing when you were asleep." As they ate dinner, Pierce shared stories about his culinary attempts, about how he burned 3 sauces before he got it just right, about how Theodore found him at 3 in the morning trying to perfect the chocolate souffle that was now waiting for dessert. "But that's not all," he said, getting up after dessert. "There's one more thing." Pierce picked up a remote control, and with a click, a large screen descended on one side of the gazebo. Images began to form, a carefully edited video showing moments from the last few months. Sage cooking at Whitman's, the baby's first ultrasounds, stolen moments of the 2 of them in the garden at home, Theodore showing off the vintage blankets, Alexandra and Rebecca decorating the nursery. How? Sage began, tears streaming freely down her face. Everyone helped, Pierce explained softly. We wanted to document this incredible journey. But there's more. The video switched to a sequence of testimonials. Theodore talking about how Sage brought life back into the Whitman family. Lauren sharing her joy at following the pregnancy. Alexander recalling the impromptu wedding day. Even Rachel talking about how true love sometimes comes disguised as fate. Pierce, Sage sobbed. Wait, he whispered, kneeling beside her even as the snow began to fall softly. Sage Mitchell Whitman, I know we started this journey in an unconventional way. I know there was pain, confusion, and fear at the beginning. But every moment since has only served to confirm what my heart has known for so long. That you were the love of my life. He took a small box out of his pocket. This is my Christmas present to you. Not just a new wedding ring, but a renewed promise. A promise of true love, chosen and nurtured. Will you marry me again? This time with no agreements, no secrets, just love. Sage took his face in her hands, tears of happiness mixing with snowflakes. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. The ring, a delicate piece of white gold with tiny butterflies engraved on it, slid perfectly on her finger. At just the right moment, the babies began to move, as if celebrating together. I think we have their approval. Pierce laughed, placing his hand on Sage's belly. Emma has always been your #1 fan, Sage smiled through her tears. And Grace and James are never far behind. The snow continued to fall softly over Nashville, transforming the love circle into a fairy tale setting. In a lighted gazebo, Pierce and Sage shared not just a moment, but a promise for the future. A future built on courageous choices, true love, and 3 little hearts that beat in perfect sync with their own. The news of Pierce and Sage's renewed engagement spread through Nashville Memorial like a warm whisper of hope. The nurses exchanged complicit glances as the surgeon passed through the corridors, his smile brighter than usual as he consulted charts between surgeries. You finally did it right, didn't you? Lauren joked during a coffee break. Now it's real love, with no agreements or obligations. Pierce watched the dark liquid in his cup thoughtfully. Actually, it always was. I just needed the courage to admit it. The Nashville winter was still harsh, and Sage had begun his absolute rest as advised by his doctor. Whitman's thrived under Rebecca, who kept the essence of the restaurant alive while adding her own special touches to the menu. The Nashville Food Guide critics loved the fusion of flavors, Alexander commented, showing the latest review to Sage, who was resting on the living room sofa. Rebecca is doing an incredible job. She's learned from the best, Theodore added, adjusting the blanket over Sage's feet. The Whitman patriarch had become a constant presence in the house, always bringing old stories and new family treasures that he found in the attic. On that particular afternoon, as the snow fell softly outside, Pierce returned home early from the hospital carrying a special surprise. I found this in the old family cottage, he announced, revealing an antique wooden cradle, exquisitely carved. It was mine as a baby. I thought we could restore it for James. Sage felt tears forming, damn pregnancy hormones, as she watched Pierce carefully examine every detail of the cradle. His surgeon's precise gestures mingled with the tenderness of an anxious father. Dr. Whitman, Margaret's voice echoed from the handset. Lily Anderson is here for her post-op appointment. A smile lit up Pierce's face. The little heart patient had recovered extraordinarily well, exceeding all expectations. Bring her in, Sage suggested softly. I want to meet our little warrior. Half an hour later, Lily was happily playing in the living room, her red curls swaying as she curiously examined Sage's belly. Do they kick a lot? The girl asked, her eyes shining with curiosity. All the time, Sage laughed, guiding Lily's small hand to a spot where Emma was performing her private dance. Especially this one. How do you know which is which? Lily asked, amazed. It's maternal instinct, Pierce replied, watching the scene with an overflowing heart. Sage knows each of them perfectly. After Lily's visit, while Pierce organized his notes for the next day, Sage watched him with renewed attention. You're going to be an incredible father, she commented softly. Pierce paused his work, turning to face her. "I'm scared sometimes," he admitted, "of not being enough, of making mistakes. That's exactly why it will be perfect," Sage smiled, holding out her hand to him. "Because you care so much." That evening, as they organized the nursery, now with the restored crib taking pride of place, Pierce shared his plans for the vow renewal ceremony. "I've thought of something intimate in the garden at home," he suggested. "When spring comes and the babies are here. With butterflies?" Sage joked, referring to the motif that had become a special symbol for them. "With everything you want," he promised, kissing her forehead affectionately. A particularly hard kick made Sage gasp, and Pierce immediately went into medical mode, timing her movements and checking her pressure. "It's fine," she assured her, recognizing the patterns. "It's just Grace doing gymnastics. She always gets more agitated when you're around." "Like Mom," he teased gently, remembering how restless Sage used to get in his presence in the early days of their arrangement. The sound of the doorbell interrupted the moment. Alexandra was at the door, carrying a mysterious box. "Rebecca sent it," she explained, revealing an elaborate cake decorated with tiny sugar butterflies. She's been practicing baking in her spare time. The cake was a work of art in itself, each detail carefully crafted to tell a story. Its butterflies seemed to dance in a spiral, like the path that had led Pierce and Sage there. "Perfect for the baby's shower," Alexander commented, already in planning mode, which, by the way, is almost all organized. "Lauren has assured us that it will be safe for Sage to attend, as long as we keep everything calm and under control." Pierce watched the two women discussing the details of the celebration, his heart overflowing with gratitude for all the support they had built up. From an agreement born of necessity, a true family had blossomed, strengthened by daily choices of love and dedication. Later, as the snow continued its silent dance outside, Pierce found Sage asleep in the nursery armchair, a name book still open on her lap. Carefully, he picked her up in his arms, marveling at how she fit perfectly against his chest, even with her protruding belly. "I love you," he whispered, knowing she couldn't hear him, but needing to say the words anyway. "All of you." And so, in the stillness of a Nashville night, as four hearts beat in harmony under one roof, Pierce Whitman finally understood the true meaning of home. It wasn't just a place, but a feeling, a certainty, a promise of tomorrows built on foundations of true love. The heart monitor's alarm went off at 3:47 a.m., rousing Pierce from his light sleep. Beside him, Sage was breathing heavily, a protective hand on her 32-week-old belly. "Pierce," she whispered, her green eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "It's happening." Within minutes, the house in Green Hills was transformed into an efficient command center. Alexandra, who had been sleeping in the guest room since Sage had gone in a strict bed rest, was already on the phone to Lauren while Pierce organized the trip to the hospital. "It's too soon," Sage muttered, trying to control her breathing as Pierce helped her into the car. "They need more time." "They're Whitmans," Pierce replied with a calm he didn't feel, his hands firm on the steering wheel as he cut through the Nashville dawn. "They're fighters by nature." Nashville Memorial welcomed them with a prepared team. Lauren was already waiting in the obstetric center, along with the neonatal team that Pierce had personally selected weeks before. "High blood pressure," Lauren announced after a quick examination. "We need to do a C-section now." "Pierce, can you stay?" Sage added, squeezing his hand. "I need you to stay." Theodore arrived moments before Sage was taken to the operating room, bringing with him the 3 vintage blankets Elizabeth had made. "For luck," he said, his voice breaking, "to protect them like they protected my boys." In the operating room, Pierce found himself torn between his role as doctor and husband. His hands, which had performed hundreds of delicate surgeries, trembled slightly as he held Sage's hand. "Emma first," Lauren announced at 4:23, and the loud crying that filled the room made Pierce's eyes water. 5 pounds, 2 ounces. Grace followed at 4:25, her voice softer but just as determined. 4 pounds and 15 ounces, the nurse informed him. The tensest moment came with James at 4:27. The silence that followed his birth seemed to last an eternity, until a small cry, fragile but persistent, cut through the air. 4 pounds, Lawrence said, already handing the baby over to the neonatal team. But his lungs are strong. The next few hours were a whirlwind of emotions. The triplets were taken to the neonatal ICU, where Pierce alternated between watching them through the glass and returning to the room where Sage was recovering. "They're perfect," he whispered, showing Sage the first photos on his cell phone. "Emma has your nose, Grace your eyes, and James, he's got his determination," Sage added, smiling through her tears. "How's our little warrior?" "Fighting bravely," Pierce replied, kissing his forehead. Like a true Whitman. The days that followed established a new routine. Pierce completely reorganized his schedule at the hospital to be present at every crucial moment. Rebecca transformed Whitman's kitchen into a production center for nutritious meals for Sage, ensuring her recovery. A week after the birth, when Emma and Grace were strong enough for the kangaroo method, Pierce found Sage in the neonatal ICU, silent tears rolling down his face as he watched James through the glass. "He'll make it," Pierce assured her, hugging her from behind. "He's got James' fighting spirit and his strong heart. And his love," Sage added softly. "The love that got us here." 2 weeks later, on a particularly sunny morning, Lauren walked into Sage's room with a beaming smile. "Someone's ready to join the sisters." James, now weighing almost 5 pounds, could finally feel the warmth of his mother's chest. Pierce watched the scene, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude. "Sage," he called softly, pulling something out of his coat pocket. It was James' diary, along with an envelope that was still sealed. "I found this morning. It's a letter he wrote to his children, in case he ever had them." With trembling hands, Sage opened the envelope while Pierce held James. James' words, written so long ago, seemed like a blessing from across time. "For my future children, I don't know if I'll ever read these words to you, but I want you to know that they were dreamed up with love. And if for some reason I can't be there, know that I've left you in the best possible hands, with 2 hearts that have always known how to truly love, even when they couldn't admit it." Theodore found them like this. Hours later, Sage breastfeeding the girls while Pierce nursed James, all united by a love that transcended convention and expectation. "Elizabeth would be proud," the patriarch commented, adjusting the vintage blankets around the babies, of how their protection agreement turned into a true love story. As the Nashville sun began to set, bathing the room in golden hues, Pierce watched his family, no longer an arrangement born of necessity, but a union forged by the purest, truest love. "3 hearts brought us together," he whispered to Sage, who was smiling sleepily with Emma and Grace in her arms. "But it was your heart that taught me how to truly love." James wriggled in his lap, his small fingers gripping his father's coat tightly, as if sealing a promise that some loves are simply meant to be, even if they need time and extraordinary circumstances to blossom. And so, under the violet Tennessee sky, 3 little hearts beat in sync with their parents, proving that sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as challenges, and that true love has the power to turn even the most unlikely agreements into stories of eternal happiness.